Thank you very much, Gerald. Okay. We know what the war is, we know who the enemy is, we know what the battleground is. Do we have a strategy for winning this war? Our record shows us that we don't. We know that the attack on Israel is framed in terms of human rights, correct? Because it's no longer, it's not fashionable, it's not acceptable to be anti-Semitic, but you can say, I'm opposed to Israel because it's a racist state, because it's an apartheid state. And even if we say, okay, inside Israel, there is equality, fair-minded people will agree with that. They will say there is discrimination, they won't seize on every instance, but on the whole, certainly in the eyes of the law, there is equality in the state of Israel. When it comes to the territories, it's a different story. And I'm wondering about the way Israel is framing its narrative to counter the Palestinian narrative. So just to shake things up, and before we start talking about NGOs and so on, I'm going to become a foreign correspondent. And I'm going to ask each of you in a minute or a minute and a half to answer this question. And this is the question. You say that you are a democracy. You say that you support human rights. And yet, while you say that you want a state for the Palestinians, you continue to build, even in places where it is clear that is supposed to be a Palestinian state. Many of your leaders say that, in fact, they don't want a Palestinian state, that all of Judea and Samaria, of the West Bank, belongs to you. And you anticipate a future in which Israelis and Palestinians will live on the West Bank. Israelis will have full rights, Palestinians will not. They will be second-class citizens. Is this not a form of apartheid? And how can you justify these policies on the part of your government, especially since you are a people who survived the Holocaust and are supposed to be more sensitive to the suffering of others?
Well, thanks for that. I'm really glad I'm sitting right next to you there. Yes, okay. You know what, I'm not going to answer the question exactly. There are some people here who are very, very well trained in doing so. What I am going to make a point of saying is that this is exactly why we are losing this, because what Leah just said is proof, really, that we lost the narrative a long time ago. We've also lost the terminology. For example, the word Zionism. You know, I have no problem calling myself a Zionist, but if I go to London or a lot of other places around the world, that's not a term of endearment. And I also want to point out as well that, you know, certainly from my point of view, honest reporting is not left-wing or right-wing. We are a consensus organisation. We have to deal with everything from the left to the right, religious, non-religious, Jewish, Christian, everything in between. And you mentioned the settlements. The settlements, this is a terminal problem for us, because it doesn't matter whether you agree with settlements or not. The media does not actually explain what it's all about. So, for example, we're not going to get an explanation of 3,000 years of Jewish history. And of course, that's a problem in itself, because I defy anyone here to actually explain 3,000 years of Jewish history in the space of 60 seconds. If you ask a Palestinian about 3,000 years of Palestinian history, well, number one, there isn't 3,000 years of Palestinian history, but you're not going to know that, because they are going to give you something in those 60 seconds that amounts to basically going back to maybe 1967, possibly 1947-48, but they're going to get their message across. We do not get the message across. And even when we saw just a couple of months ago, the example of settlement building in the E1 section between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim. This was used by the government apparently as a way to punish the Palestinians for their actions at the United Nations. Well, you know, I'm going to say it clearly here. What a stupid, stupid idea. Because we got ourselves in a PR mess over a place where we're not going to be building anything for the next several years anyway. And as for punishing the Palestinians, we only have to look at who got punished, because we were the ones that got it in the neck in the media, in diplomatic circles, in the United Nations, from the Europeans and everyone else. Sometimes, when it comes to an issue like settlements, it's not just about being right, it's also about being smart. And there are plenty of times where we are right, but there are plenty more times where we are not smart.
Am I off the hook about answering the question by now? Okay, so let's go back to your question, Len. Look, it wouldn't be polite for me to ask you where you got the idea that Israeli leaders don't think Palestinian Arabs are entitled to a state, because I don't think you can identify a single mainstream Israeli leader, either in the opposition or in the government, who has ever said such a thing. So let's leave aside the inaccuracy of what you said. Let's focus on the interpretation of what you looked at, the use of the word apartheid. Look, you're looking at a country here where the alleged victims of apartheid, Palestinian Arabs, some of whom are citizens of Israel. You can look at a country where briefly, for reasons I don't want to go into, the acting president of Israel was a Palestinian Arab for a few days. That is so totally different to the situation that black South Africans had to endure, that I think is really a gross insult to the suffering that they went through, to try and use the term apartheid to mean just whatever you wanted it to mean when you're pointing at it. Millions of black South Africans suffered under the heel of real apartheid. Millions of black South Africans understood what apartheid was. You clearly do not, if you ask such a question, and I think you should go out of here and apologise to every black South African. Is that okay?
Right. First of all, I'd like to ask everyone's forgiveness, because unfortunately I have to leave very soon. And after what I'm about to say, it's probably a good thing that I'm going to leave very soon. Because I entirely agree with the question. If we end up in a situation where we are controlling a large number of people who do not have full sovereign rights and don't control their own destiny and do not have the same civil rights as other Israelis, then that is essentially apartheid. You can call it other names, but it is a situation which I think is intolerable. We can no longer genuinely call ourselves a proper democracy, and we have to get to a situation where Palestinians who have the ability to have a sovereign state of their own, where they are responsible for whatever way in which they choose to run their society. We need to get there. So the question is not what would be the position if we got there. Why are we not there? And I would say that to suggest that the answer is because Israel is made up of lots of wicked, nasty, vicious, horrible, oppressive Israelis is absurd. It's a much more nuanced problem. And we recently tried to run a prototype Palestinian state in Gaza, and we received 12,000 reasons why we haven't expanded the experiment to the West Bank. And every single one of those was an explosive device that was aimed at the civilian population of Israel. It is a nuanced problem. It is not easy to get from where the vast majority of the Israeli population want to be, which is a two-state solution. That is unquestionably the consensus in survey after survey of what Israeli people want. And people seem to, around the world, forget the most powerful movement within the Middle East is in fact the Israeli electorate. And the Israeli electorate would vote tomorrow for a Palestinian state if they did not think there was going to be another 12,000 rockets coming over from somewhere a lot closer to the major population densities. As someone who recently experienced sitting halfway up the Azrieli Tower, a warning going off that a missile was about to hit, and I had 4 or 5 people sitting with me in the office. It was a fairly scary feeling for a moment. I didn't know where that missile was going to land, and I was being told that I had to take shelter. It's quite difficult to do in 40 seconds when you're on the 30th floor of a mainly glass tower block. That is a very good reason why we haven't got there yet. There are huge challenges It is not sufficient to say we're an apartheid state because of the position we're in, because the Israeli population, the Israeli voting electorate, and Israeli politicians are trying to get to a solution. This is a nuanced, difficult problem, and you should not blame it on the Israelis.
I'm in the situation of everything good has already been said, but not everyone has said it. So I will try to add a little bit to that, but I think all of the points were very well made. Can I answer the next one first instead of me? I would answer two. I would make two very quick responses in addition to all the things that were said. I would emphasize Israel's a democracy. What you as a reporter have to do is try to find out why it is that the Israeli public, in every election over the last 20 or 30 years, has had the opportunity to support parties that promote, accelerate a two-state agreement solution, and Israelis are nervous about that. And the points that were made just now explain that nervousness. So if you're a serious reporter, you try to explain that and not simply repeat the slogans. What I found missing from your question was the phrase, from sea to sea, Palestine will be free. Because the people who use the language of apartheid, the people who say Israel has to be boycotted, some of them say for their own good. Some Jews say that as well. Because Israel is incapable, like children, of making the right democratic decisions. Also say, and if you look at the boycott movement's website, it's very clear, from sea to sea, Palestine will be free. Where does that put Israel? Who's the apartheid state here? Who's the immoral actor here? And if you can't understand that framework, then there's no sense in my having a conversation, because nothing will convince you. That may not be a good response to a particular journalist, but it expresses